In June 1962, three inmates crafted the most ingenious illusion in the history of criminology. They fashioned dummy heads from soap, toilet paper, and real hair collected from the prison barbershop. The cell air smelled of dampness and cheap soap as they carefully tucked these decoys under the blankets. The sound of a guard's footsteps on the metal floor echoed through the halls, yet the flashlight beam glided over the fake faces without noticing the switch. While the guards believed in the inmates' peaceful slumber, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers already felt the salty taste of the San Francisco Bay fog on their lips. It was an escape into the unknown, where the cold ocean water became their only hope, and the soapheads remained silent witnesses to their disappearance. Richard Lee McNair proved that freedom doesn't require tunnels, just a single cardboard box will do. In April 2006, he concealed himself within a mail container that he had personally packaged during his prison labor shifts. The air inside was stifling and thick, reeking of ancient dust and the sharp scent of fresh adhesive. Every jolt of the truck resonated as agony through his cramped muscles, while the roar of the mechanical loader sounded like the crashing of thunder. He lay motionless for hours, feeling the sweat flood his eyes while absolute darkness reigned all around him. Once the box was finally transported beyond the prison walls, he simply sliced through the tape and stepped into freedom in the middle of the bright day. It was a triumph of patience over the system, where a man transformed himself into mere cargo to slip through the hands of justice forever. Pascal Payet turned the sky into his personal path to freedom, utilizing a helicopter 3 times to escape from French prisons. In July 2007, the roar of rotors shattered the silence over Grasse Prison, while the air filled with the pungent scent of aviation fuel. Armed associates landed the aircraft directly onto the roof of the cell block, while guards froze in shock at the sheer audacity of the plan. Payet felt the vibration of the floor beneath his feet, and the cold wind lashing his face, promising freedom in mere seconds. It was a stuntman's feat brought to real life, where the thrum of the rotor blades became a true anthem of defiance. He vanished into the clouds before the alarm could even be raised, leaving the prison walls far below beneath the cover of a scorching blue sky. The world's wealthiest drug lord, Joaquin Guzman, transformed his escape into an engineering marvel worth $1 million. In July 2015, he simply vanished from the shower stall of a maximum security prison. Beneath the floor, a lit tunnel extending 1.5 kilometers awaited him, fully equipped with ventilation and a private railway system. The underground air was damp and heavy, reeking of raw clay and the sharp scent of gasoline from a specially prepared motorcycle. The roar of the engine, echoing loudly through the confined space, became for him the most beautiful music of salvation. He flew across the distance at immense speed, feeling his fear fall behind with every meter conquered. It was the escape of a true professional, proving that no walls can withstand the power of vast wealth and brilliant planning. Billy Hayes found himself in a Turkish prison on a remote island for smuggling, and realized the only path home lay across the nocturnal sea. During a violent storm in October 1975, he slipped out of the work zone and stole a small boat. The air reeked of the storm, salt-soaked seaweed, and mortal peril as every wave fought to overturn his fragile vessel. The sound of oars rhythmically plunging into the cold water was the only thing he heard in the absolute darkness, battling the current for long hours. His body trembled from the bitter cold, yet his will proved stronger than any iron shackles. He crossed the bay and reached the mainland, where every step on foreign soil brought him closer to final salvation. This was the escape of a man who risked everything on a single night and won his ultimate chance for a new life. March 1934. John Dillinger grips a pistol in his hand, smelling of fresh shoe polish. The guards of Crown Point Prison freeze under the aim of dark metal, unaware of the massive deception. It was nothing more than a scrap of wood, whittled by a razor blade and stained a deep, deceptive black. Dillinger felt the raw grain of the wood beneath his palm, yet his voice rang out with the cold, unyielding edge of steel. He marched the hostages out, seized the sheriff's car, and vanished into a swirling shroud of dust. It was a victory of pure bluff over an armed system, where absolute self-assurance alone forced open doors long thought to be unshakable. March 1944, the high-security Stalag Luft 3 camp. Deep beneath the earth, 80 British pilots moved through a tunnel extending 100 meters. The air was heavy, reeking of stale oxygen and the raw, damp stench of the earth. The rattle of wooden carts rolling on makeshift rails sounded louder than a clap of thunder to their strained ears. They spent long months constructing this passage, concealing excavated soil in their trousers, and scattering it bit by bit during their daily walks. When the final prisoner finally crawled out, he felt the biting chill of the German forest and the sharp scent of pine needles against his skin. It was the grandest engineering feat in the history of captivity, where the indomitable will for freedom proved stronger than the Reich's reinforced concrete walls. South Korea, in the year 2012. Choi Gapbok, a master of yoga, waited for the shroud of night to demonstrate the sheer impossibility of human anatomy. He coated his entire body with a specialized oil that reeked of pungent herbs and animal fat. Once the guards drifted into sleep, he began to slowly slide through the food service slot, measuring only 15 by 45 centimeters. The screeching sound of skin friction against the cold metal was the only noise shattering the absolute silence of the cell. He writhed like a serpent, feeling the unyielding steel corners pressed deep into his very ribs. The entire escape lasted less than 30 seconds. When the guards discovered the empty cell in the morning, they could not believe their own eyes. It was the escape of a man who had transformed his very body into a key to every lock. February 1864. At the infamous Libby prison. 109 Union Army officers vanished in the dead of night through a tunnel carved with nothing but ordinary table knives. The air within the crawlspace was heavy, thick with the stench of rot, damp mold, and the presence of nesting rats. They crawled one after another in total darkness, holding their breath at every single sound of the sentries, footsteps pacing above their heads. When the first officer finally emerged into the warehouse yard beyond the walls, he felt the biting winter wind and the sweet, unmistakable scent of freedom. More than half of the escapees successfully reached their own lines after trekking across hundreds of miles of hostile enemy territory. It was an act of collective bravery where simple metal conquered solid stone, and a shared purpose transformed the impossible into reality. June 2015, within the walls of Clinton Correctional Facility, Richard Matt and David Sweat utilized tools smuggled inside frozen meat to cut their way through the thick steel walls of their cells. The air inside the technical tunnels was scorching with steam and reeked of rusted water and industrial grease. The sound of the hacksaw gnawing into the thick metal felt like an eternal, agonizing symphony to them. They crawled through a labyrinth of piping until they finally emerged from a sewer hatch beyond the prison walls. On the tunnel wall, they left behind a mocking note, wishing the authorities a pleasant day. It was a Hollywood-style breakout, where patience and bribery turned a modern fortress into nothing more than a theatrical stage set. December 2000. 7 inmates at the John Connolly unit in Texas staged a performance that paralyzed the entire security force. They summoned the guards one by one into a technical room that reeked of grease and ancient dust. Every single time, the thud of the closing door signaled the end of freedom for yet another guard. They were bound, gagged, and stripped. The group's leader, George Rivas, operated with absolute calm, as if conducting a grand orchestra. They seized the weapons, donned disguises, and drove right through the main gates in a service truck. The outside air was dry and biting with frost, yet for them, it was the first breath of real life in many long years. This escape triggered the most massive manhunt in the state's modern history, where 7 men defied an entire nation. September 1983. Europe's most secure prison, the Maze in Northern Ireland, was rocked by the audacity of 38 inmates. They seized control of the block, wielding nothing but homemade weapons. The air reeked of cheap food and a tangible fear that flooded the narrow stone corridors. When the supply truck arrived with provisions, they transformed it into their very own Trojan horse. 38 men crammed themselves into the cargo hold, a space reeking of exhaust fumes and raw, cold metal. The roar of the engine as it gained momentum sounded to them like their final, desperate chance for salvation. They smashed through the gates under a hail of guard fire, dissolving into the open fields like shifting shadows. It was the greatest escape in the history of the British system, proving that even the most formidable walls possess their own hidden weaknesses. London, 18th century. Jack Shepherd became a folk hero not for his crimes, but for his uncanny, almost supernatural ability to pass right through walls. During his final escape from Newgate Prison, He was shackled to the floor by heavy irons, in a dark cell that reeked of mold and filth. The sound of metal grinding filled the silence while Jack used a common nail to pick the iron locks. He ascended through the chimney, dismantling bricks with his bare hands, feeling the thick soot clog his lungs. He leaped across the rooftops of London, while below him drifted the stench of coal smoke and river rot. His agility was so legendary that crowds gathered in the squares, just to catch a glimpse of the man who cheated death and iron 6 times in a row. Devil's Island in French Guiana was regarded as a place from which no one ever returns, but Henri Chevalier, widely known as Papillon, harbored a different plan altogether. He observed the ocean waves, studying their relentless rhythm, while the air was thick with the scent of salt and decaying wood. He fashioned a makeshift raft from 2 sacks, stuffed with coconuts, then hurled himself into the abyss from a towering cliff. The sound of the impact against the water cracked like a gunshot, followed by an endless, brutal struggle against the current. The sun burned his skin without mercy, and his lips cracked and bled under the harsh crust of sea salt. Every wave threatened to become his grave, yet he clung to those sacks as his singular, desperate bridge to survival. He conquered 30 miles of open, unforgiving sea, proving that the hunger for freedom can transcend the very laws of nature. Frank Abagnale demonstrated that the most formidable doors are unlocked not by brute force, but by the power of the intellect. While being transported to prison in a federal van, he convinced the guards that he was actually an undercover prison inspector. The air in the van was thick with the smell of coffee and the guards' cheap cologne, their belief in him growing with every passing minute. The sharp click of the briefcase he held in his hands served to further underscore his authority. When the van came to a halt at the gates, he simply stepped out through the front door, politely thanking the guards for the ride. They even saluted him as he departed, completely unaware that they had just released one of the world's most wanted con artists. It was an escape executed in pure style, where self-confidence became the ultimate master key to his shackles. Stephen Russell transformed his escape into a veritable masterpiece of performance art. For weeks, he collected green ballpoint pen refills to gather enough ink for his ultimate goal. The air in his cell reeked of chemicals and alcohol as he carefully dyed his white prison clothes the color of a medical gown. He applied the diluted dye to his skin, giving himself a sickly hue, and simply walked out through the main entrance. The sound of his footsteps in the corridor was calm and assured, and the guards didn't even cast a glance toward the fake doctor. His heart hammered so violently it felt as though it would burst from his chest, yet his face remained a mask of professional serenity. It was a victory of imagination over ironclad discipline, where ordinary office supplies became the key to his shackles. In May 1986, Michel Vaujour stood on the roof of La Santé prison, waiting not for a lawyer's help, but for the roar of an aircraft engine. His wife Nadine, who had specifically learned to pilot a helicopter, hovered directly above the towers of the casemate, the air filled with the sharp stench of burnt kerosene and clouds of dust kicked up from the scorching roof by the blades. Michel held nectarines and fruit painted to look like grenades to keep the guards at a distance. The roar of the rotor cutting through the Parisian silence became for him the true music of liberation. He grabbed onto the skids and ascended into the sky, feeling the wind of freedom lash against his face. It was the most romantic and dangerous escape of the decade, where love proved to be stronger than any laws or walls. October 1964, Berlin. Directly beneath the wall that split the world in two, a group of students dug a passage 140 meters long. The air inside the narrow crawl space was heavy and damp, reeking of raw clay and rusted metal. The sound of patrol footsteps overhead forced them to hold their breath for long, agonizing minutes. They moved by touch, feeling the cold earth beneath their fingernails until they reached a secret basement in the eastern part of the city. 57 people traveled this path to freedom, clinging to the tunnel walls like a lifeline. Every move they made was a challenge to the system that built a concrete barrier but forgot the power of the human desire to breathe free air. At the end of the 16th century, John Gerard became the first person capable of escaping the grim Tower of London. He used a rope that friends had launched across the fortress moat, using a simple arrow. The air above the Thames was thick with fog, and reeked of stagnant water and ancient stone salt. His fingers, shattered by torture, slid along the wet rope, while every movement sent unbearable agony through his shoulders. The roar of waves crashing against the tower's base muffled the creak of the rope against the stone battlements. He dangled above the abyss, feeling his strength drain from his body, yet his faith in salvation proved stronger than gravity itself. It was a triumph of the spirit over the chill of a medieval prison, where a simple rope became a bridge between a death sentence and a new life. January 2001. Mexico's most infamous prisoner, Joaquin Guzman, proved that corruption reeks of laundry detergent and dirty linens. He concealed himself at the very bottom of a laundry cart, buried under mounds of used sheets and discarded prison uniforms. The air inside was stifling and hot, reeking of heavy bleach and the pungent sweat of others. The rhythmic clicking of the cartwheels against the tiled floor sounded to him like the final countdown of seconds to freedom. The guards, fueled by massive bribes, simply rolled him out through the main gates to a waiting vehicle. This was El Chapo's first major escape, revealing to the world that golden keys open any lock, and a simple laundry basket can serve as a throne room for the king of the narco world. Yoshi Shiratori understood that iron had its own unique weakness, and he called it rust. Every day, he poured a bit of miso soup onto the metal frame of the food service slot in his cell. The air in the room was saturated with the scent of sweet paste, dampness, and oxidized metal. The salt in the soup slowly corroded the iron, allowing Shiratori to literally squeeze himself out through the narrow, weakened opening. He possessed the rare ability to dislocate his own joints, transforming his body into a flexible ribbon that knew no obstacles. It was the escape of a man who proved that even iron and concrete can be defeated with common soup and incredible endurance. June 1962. Alcatraz Island, a place from which escape was deemed impossible due to the freezing waters and predatory sharks. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers spent grueling months widening ventilation shafts using nothing but ordinary spoons. They crafted deceptive dummy heads from soap, paper, and actual human hair to fool the guards during midnight head counts. Under the cover of night, they launched a raft made of raincoats and vanished into the freezing abyss, leaving only a legend behind. Venice, 1755. The Piombi prison, known as the Leads, was considered a place from which escape was utterly impossible. Giacomo Casanova wielded an iron bolt as a chisel, spending long months hacking his way through the ceiling of his cell. The air upon the rooftops was frigid, reeking of sea salt and a freedom he hadn't tasted in years. It was the escape of a legendary adventurer, proving that even lead roofs cannot hold one who is prepared to risk everything for life itself. March 1621. Loevestein Castle became a cage for the scholar Hugo Grotius. The air inside was stifling, saturated with the scent of ancient knowledge and the desperate hope of salvation. It was the escape of a scholar who proved that books could offer not just knowledge, but freedom to those who know how to employ them. Colditz Castle was hailed as the most secure prison of the Third Reich, a fortress designed to hold the most dangerous Allied officers. Yet deep beneath the roof, hidden within a secret attic, British prisoners began the clandestine construction of a real aircraft. The attic air was saturated with dust, and the sharp scent of fresh wood and glue, painstakingly brewed from prison rations. They dismantled floorboards for timber and repurposed bedsheets to fashion the wings of their future glider. The glider, christened the Colditz Cock, was designed to launch from the roof, soaring over the abyss and the sentries far below. Every strike of a tool in the attic had to be completely silent to avoid the detection of the patrols marching directly below. It was an escape born of dreams, where ordinary bedsheets were transformed into wings of hope, defying the very gravity of their situation. May 1568. Mary, Queen of Scots, was held captive on a desolate island in the center of Loch Leven. While the lord of the castle dined, his young page stealthily snatched the keys resting on the table right beside a goblet of wine. She locked the fortress gates behind her, severing any hope of pursuit for her captors. As the boat drifted from the shore, Mary cast the keys into the depths of the lake, forever submerging her captivity. December 1899. A young war correspondent named Winston Churchill was preparing for an escape that would change the course of his life. He scaled the wall while the sentries were momentarily distracted, dissolving into the pitch-black night of enemy territory. The air reeked of coal dust and scorching iron as he journeyed into the unknown aboard a freight train. It was the escape that transformed a simple journalist into a national hero, proving that the will to victory knows no borders. April 2006. Richard Lee McNair decided that the best way to exit a federal prison was inside an ordinary mail parcel. The air within was stifling, thick with a scent of dust and cardboard. Yet for him, it was the very fragrance of hope. He concealed himself within a mail pallet, which was then transported beyond the prison walls on a standard cargo flight. To him, the screech of tearing plastic rang out louder than any prison bell ever could. Mere hours after his escape, a police officer pulled him over, yet McNair's lies about a morning jog were so convincing that he was simply let go. Pascal Payette ascended to legendary status not merely for escaping, but for the recurring audacity of how he did it, time and again. He utilized helicopters on 3 separate occasions, once to escape himself, and twice more to return and liberate his friends. The scream of metal pushed to its absolute breaking point sounded like a hymn of freedom to his ears. It was the escape of a man who made the very sky his accomplice, and the helicopter his personal taxi to freedom. March 1934. John Dillinger demonstrated that to escape the most secure prison, sometimes all you need is imagination and a simple piece of wood. The air in the cell was thick with the scent of shoe polish, as he meticulously stained his homemade weapon. The sharp metallic click he imitated with his mouth forced the guards to believe in the cold reality of death. He hijacked the sheriff's car and vanished, leaving behind nothing but road dust and a piece of carved wood in the hands of the stunned guards. October 1975. Imrali Island was a maritime hell, where every breath reeked of dampness and utter hopelessness. Payette proved that for those who do not fear the heights, the sky is not a boundary, but merely a path back home. September 2012, South Korea. Choi Gap-bok demonstrated that mastery of yoga can be far more dangerous than any weapon. He coated his body in a specialized ointment, transforming his skin into a slick surface prepared for the impossible. In just 34 seconds, he slipped through a gap measuring 15 by 45 centimeters, leaving the guards in a state of absolute shock. October 1943. The inmates of Sobibor were preparing not merely an escape, but a revolt against death itself. More than 300 people surged through the fire and minefields, choosing freedom at any imaginable cost. These 33 facts are more than just escape stories. They are living proof that the human will is stronger than any metal, and the hunger for freedom is a force that can never truly be imprisoned. A spoon, a bowl of soup, or a scrap of wood. In the hands of someone hungry for freedom, any object becomes a weapon against even the darkest prison. History teaches us there are no walls formidable enough to permanently contain the spirit. The key is to never stop digging your own tunnel toward the light. Which of these escapes stunned you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the 33 Facts channel and hit the bell to ensure you never miss the next dose of incredible history.